This is Robin Whitten. I'm the editor of AudioFile magazine.
And I'm Jo Reed, avid audiobook listener. We're here to share our picks about what we've been listening to during the summer while we're on the road. Whether you're heading out in a car, in the train, or on the bus, nothing beats a good audiobook.
That's right. And I like the idea of listening on the road about being on the road.
It's
so
really pretty fabulous.
I have some choices that are actually about road trips.
I agree. I love listening to books about traveling while I'm traveling. Why don't you go first, Robin? You begin.
So starting out with what at least is billed as the first great American road trip, which is an audiobook called Horatios Drive. What I loved about it, it truly is about a 1903 trip across the country in an early automobile by a doctor named Horatio Nelson Jackson, and he drove from San Francisco to New York City in 90 days for a bet that he took, that he could do it for $50.
Like around the world in 80 days?
Yes, but it was in an early automobile. Of course, the roads, even if the technology of the automobile was okay, or at least the car ran where he drove it around San Francisco, once he got into the wilds, the adventures really started. So this is an audiobook that was produced by Ken Burns and Dayton Duncan, written together. You have Ken Burns and Dayton Duncan, and then they enlisted a lot of celebrities, including Tom Hanks. So they tell the story about Horatio Nelson Jackson and his car and the things that he encountered with a wonderful kind of a folksy sense, because that's the way the story is, going across America in, early 20th century.
We leave in the morning for Oroville, the last railway point we will have until we strike Ontario, Oregon. When we get there, the worst will be over. I can run the car as well as Crocker, and have rather surprised him. We take 2 hours on and 2 off at the wheel. He is a mighty good man. I am fine, and the only trouble is, I miss you so. Nelson.
It's a great story about a road trip, and maybe it is the first road trip.
I have a mid-20th century road book, which is John Steinbeck's Travels with Shirley. And I recently took a 700-mile car trip, and boy, did this book get me through it. And especially, I think, because I didn't have my dog, who is named Charlie after Steinbeck's Charlie.
I think that's so great.
Yeah, it's true. So he decides he wants to go across the United States. He's going in the opposite direction. He's going from Maine to Oregon and California. He's from California, from Salinas. And this is in the mid-20th century. It's about 1960. And he has a pickup truck rigged so that it becomes a little cabin for him and the dog. And the description of this cabin is really quite extraordinary. And you're torn between seeing it completely and wondering, how did everything all fit in there? This is nuts.
And just on the back of his pickup truck, right?
And it's just on the back of his pickup truck.
I wanted a 3/4-ton pickup truck, capable of going anywhere under possibly rigorous conditions, and on this truck I wanted a little house built, like the cabin of a small boat. A trailer is difficult to maneuver on mountain roads, is impossible and often illegal to park, and is subject to many restrictions. In due time, specifications came through for a tough, fast, comfortable vehicle, mounting a camper top, a little house with double bed, a 4-burner stove, a heater, refrigerator, and lights operating on butane, a chemical toilet, closet space, storage space, windows screened against insects, exactly what I wanted.
And it really is a picture of two things. One, he begins by talking about how Americans love the road. And I'm not sure we can generalize about that, but I know this American loves the road. Show me a car trip and I am packed and ready to go. So I really could identify with that. The other thing that was really interesting was Steinbeck is such a good listener, so curious about people, very non-judgmental. He just really wants to know what makes people tick. And, we'll get into these conversations with folks. And it's narrated by Gary Sinise, who is so good at picking up the accents as they move across the country that there were moments when I'm driving and listening to this and I have to remind myself, oh my God, that's still Gary Sinise. And that happened on more than one occasion. He's really that good.
And he has such a good informal narrative voice for Steinbeck. It seems just right. I mean, I cannot recall John Steinbeck's actual voice, but to me, this is Steinbeck telling that story and talking about the people he's meeting.
But I think it really comes into play when it's Steinbeck talking about Charlie. What Sinise does with his voice then, there's a lovingness, there's a lightness. As a dog owner, I really can appreciate the tone. But also, one has to say, it is mid-century America in the 20th century. So Steinbeck ends in the South, and there is a school desegregation horror going on in New Orleans. And Steinbeck goes to witness some of it, and as he's talking about the way white Southerners talk, you are going to hear the N-word, and that just needs to be right out there. And the other thing that really struck me, it is very guy. There are very few women in it. It is a very, very guy book, which does not diminish my appreciation for it, but it was quite noticeable to me.
Interesting. And what I remarked on while I listened was the philosophical aspects of it, more than the travel from place, but, his thoughts about things. He's ruminating and contemplating, and it is the end of Steinbeck's life, near the end of his life. So he's bringing all his many experiences of his very rich and varied life and talking to ordinary people along the road. And it would be interesting to think about what would happen 50 years later. And interesting when you think about, as you mentioned, going to the South in the 60s, if you have young people on your road trip with you, one of the books that we thought we'd talk about was a book that does actually put a young family in that time, in fiction, in The Watsons Go to Birmingham.
The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963, by Christopher Paul Curtis, whom I adore as a writer. And I love this book. And it is a great audiobook, and I read it and loved it before I heard it. So you know how sometimes when that happens, you really have a sense of the way these people speak and who they are, and sometimes it can be hard to really be open to an audiobook or to be captivated by it, because I've already created the movie in my mind. But LeVar Burton is so good as the narrator. I was willing to give up all of my characterizations and just marry his. It's like, oh man, he just nailed that. It's so good.
Yes, he fully creates everyone, the kids and their varied ages, their relationship with their family.
And it's wonderful because it's a book that really runs a gamut, because it is a very funny book. I laughed out loud at various points in this book as Kenny, who's the narrator, is trying to deal with his older brother Byron, whose mission on Earth is to torment Kenny. And their mother comes from the South, and they're living in Flint, Michigan, so they're cold. They're really cold.
Ironically, Flint, Michigan.
Yeah, which is where Christopher Paul Curtis grew up. He used to work in the auto plant. So there are so many funny scenes of their mother bundling the kids up to go to school. It was really like 2 winter coats. He has a little sister. If his little sister falls, it's like she bounces because she's just so bundled up because her mother so hates the cold and is fearful of it.
Mama pulled her hand away from her mouth. Daniel Watson, you are one lying man. Only thing you said that was true was that being in Flint is like living in an igloo. I knew I should have listened to Moses. Maybe these babies might have been born with lumpy heads, but at least they'd have had warm, lumpy heads. You know Birmingham is a good place, and I don't mean just the weather either. The life is slower. The people are friendlier. Oh, yeah, Dad interrupted. They're a laugh a minute down there. Let's see, where was that coloreds-only bathroom downtown? Daniel, you know what I mean. Things aren't perfect, but people are more honest about the way they feel. She took her mean eyes off Dad and put them on Byron. And folks there do know how to respect their parents.
They end up taking that trip because his brother is misbehaving, and they're going to bring Byron down to the grandparents for the summer, possibly for the school year. But at the same time, you get a sense of what it means for a black family to be driving down south during that time. The mother making all these sandwiches because they can't stop anywhere on the road.
And I think that our young families today can really put themselves along with the Watsons and go on that trip and try to imagine what that must have been like.
Exactly, because what happens, they're in Birmingham, Alabama at the time of the church bombing and have to deal with it as a family. And what Christopher Paul Curtis does at the end of the book is he really talks about that time in history and really makes it so easy for a family to have a conversation about what happened during that time in American history. And it's so easy then to link it to what's going on today. And it is a book that opens doors to conversations that parents can often find difficult to have with their children. Children can often find difficult to have with parents.
I think that's absolutely right. And that's one of the great things about audiobooks. I mean, really, it does open up many conversations among families. And certainly as you travel along, as you listen, it's great. So I had another book to just kind of do something a little different, which is the NPR collection of road trip segments that had been broadcast at various times. But they've been grouped together in one set of stories about the national parks and another one about fairs and festivals. And these are actual reporting from the road about curious incidents or events at the fairs, what you want to eat, what you can see, these crazy contests at some of the country fairs, and then in the national parks, one of the ones I loved is about all the people that are part of the guest services at the Grand Canyon National Park, including the guy who runs the mules down into the canyon.
Casey Murph's lecture, which is designed to unmotivate the weak-willed.
Folks, I don't know what you might be expecting from this. I hope that you are not imagining a pony ride at Disneyland. This is not the easy way to see the canyon, folks. There is no easy way to see the canyon.
It's a narrow, winding trail down, and mules, he says, don't like surprises.
When your mule sees that rock that wasn't there yesterday, he is certain that rock was put there by the Grand Canyon mule-eating troll and will not pass it. Unless you stay so close to the mule in front of you, when he looks ahead, all he can see is another mule's rear end.
Really, I was laughing so hard about the guy with the mules, Casey Murph. I'd just go just to meet him. You know, whether you're on the road trip to the same place or not, it's great listening.
There's one other, because women have got to represent on the road, even though it is traditionally men hit the road and women stay behind, cry, and sing the blues. But Elizabeth Gilbert, Eat, Pray, Love, when her heart was broken, she took to the road and went to Italy, India, and then Indonesia. All eyes, I'm not sure why. She spent 4 months in each place and focused on one part of herself. In other words, Eat, Pray, Love, and that's really what it was about. In Italy, it was about food and sensuality and being happy in a beautiful place and trying to live like an Italian, just being able to appreciate the art, the food, the wine, the beauty of the sky, a lovely walk through the piazza. In India, she spent time in an ashram with her guru and tried to be more committed to a spiritual practice. And then she went to Indonesia, where she actually fell in love. Now, this sounds like a very self-involved book, and it probably could be, except I usually hate self-involved books. I really, really have a thing against them. And I found this book charming. And she's the narrator, and she is a great narrator. She has a wonderful voice. It feels like she's in conversation with you.
I wish Giovanni would kiss me. Oh, but there are so many reasons why this would be a terrible idea. To begin with, Giovanni is 10 years younger than I am, and, like most Italian guys in their 20s, he still lives with his mother. These facts alone make him an unlikely romantic partner for me, given that I am a professional American woman in my mid-30s who has just come through a failed marriage and a devastating, interminable divorce, followed immediately by a passionate love affair that ended in sickening heartbreak. This loss upon loss has left me feeling sad and brittle and about 7,000 years old. Purely as a matter of principle, I wouldn't inflict my sorry, busted-up old self on the lovely, unsullied Giovanni.
It's really a wonderful book to listen to when you're on the road, and I've done it. It's really fun and good. You're rooting for her.
Well, you really take that journey with her as her companion, and maybe a little bit like the Steinbeck and Shirley. Well, you know, Joe, there's one more book audio book that we really need to talk about, which is on a lot of people's minds, American Gods by Neil Gaiman, which he wrote actually 2001, so quite a while ago, but has just been produced as a mini-series for the Starz Network. So a lot of people are seeing that story, but that's a road trip.
Is it ever a road trip? I listened to that book, a while ago, and I loved that book. I loved the premise of that book. I loved the idea that all the gods who were brought here by everyone, traces of them still remain. You could stop right there. It's like you had me at hello, you have me at that plot point. I was absolutely on board with that and enthralled throughout.
Well, it's interesting because there actually are 2 audiobook productions of the book. One done first by the brilliant George Goodall.
That's the one I listened to.
So it's a single voice, and he has all of those characters. He has all of those gods. George takes them all on and presents them in an amazing way. And then at the 10th anniversary of the book publication, they produced it again, but with a full cast. So in that production, there are probably a dozen or more actors who take the different roles.
I have taken the liberty, said Mr. Wednesday, washing his hands in the men's room of Jack's Crocodile Bar, of ordering food for myself to be delivered to your table. We have much to discuss, after all.
I don't think so.
He dried his own hands on a paper towel and crumpled it and dropped it into the bin. You need a job. People don't hire ex-cons. You folk make them uncomfortable.
I have a job waiting. A good job.
So it's a very different experience, but I think the richness of the characters, first, George can handle all that and make it come alive for you as a listener. And, when you put more voices in and you get a whole cast, they play off each other, and there's a wonderful interplay there.
Yeah, it's like Jim Dale doing Harry Potter, which was fabulous. But then the multicast, The Golden Compass, which was fabulous. And they're fabulous in different ways, but equally compelling. Robin, it is always good to catch up and find out what you're listening to and to compare notes.
And this was a pleasure to talk about these audiobooks and have a little time on the road with them.
This is Robin Whitten, editor of AudioFile magazine.
And I'm Joe Reed, avid audiobook listener. You can check out many more listening ideas at audiofilemagazine.com. And happy traveling.